Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive, frankly fundamental shift in how we design our cities. We're talking about moving away from those rigid, concrete master plans and instead embracing flexible, community-led experiments. And the ultimate goal here? It's to break down the invisible borders between us. So if you've ever looked around your own neighborhood and thought, man, why does it feel so disconnected around here? Or wondered how spaces could actually be designed to bring people together? Well, you're absolutely in the right place. Okay, let's quickly glance at our roadmap for today. We're going to start by looking at breaking down city borders, then examine the limits of traditional planning before we enter what's known as the real-world lab. From there, we'll dive into a specific case study in Hanover-Salkamp, compare the two approaches side by side, and finally look ahead to the future of our cities. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, breaking down city borders, specifically looking at the physical and mental divides in our cities. Urban planning isn't just about pouring concrete or laying asphalt. It is fundamentally about human connection and lived experience. To really ground this idea, let's look at this incredible reflection from the preface of the 2002 Corp Planning Conference. The editor, Manfred Schrink, shares this deeply personal story about growing up in a small town called Greenmont. His town was literally divided right down the middle of his grandparents' garden by the Iron Curtain. He notes that growing up right on that border felt quote-unquote normal to him at the time. But looking back, he realized how absolutely unnatural it is for some arbitrary line in the dirt to dictate what category of human being you are. He actually wrote this really poignant poem after witnessing a tragic death at that very border, right on his childhood playground. In it, he wrote that only when the former Border Patrol can sit peacefully in his parlor for tea will he truly be able to breathe deeply and enjoy life. So why does this matter for us today? Well, as Schrink points out, even when those massive physical walls finally fall, the mental borders in our cities, they stick around. And those mental borders still need to be actively, thoughtfully dismantled by modern planners.
Which brings us to Section 2, limits of traditional planning, and why master plans often miss the mark.
So how do we actually go about breaking down these invisible mental borders, especially in today's super diverse neighborhoods? Well, the standard approach has pretty much always been traditional planning. You know the drill, relying on rigid, long-term master plans that are designed to create absolute certainty. They want to outline exactly what goes where, definitively. But here's the catch. Even when these traditional, highly formalized processes try to include citizen participation, they often completely miss the people who actually use the spaces every day. They're so goal-oriented and risk-averse that if you're trying to solve complex social disconnection, a rigid blueprint is just going to miss the mark entirely. And that leads us perfectly into Section 3, enter the real-world lab, marking a paradigm shift in urban development. To get around that rigidity we just talked about, a fascinating new academic and practical concept has popped up. It's called the real-world lab, or Real Labor in the original German research. Instead of planning a neighborhood from some distant, quiet office, a real-world lab flips the script and uses the city itself as the testing ground. Think of it as a research infrastructure anchored right out there in the messy, complex reality of a specific societal context. The goal isn't just to sit back and observe. It's to actually test out transformative solutions right alongside the community. And within these labs, we run what are called real-world experiments. Now, unlike a chemistry lab where everything is strictly controlled, these are temporary, completely reversible interventions out in the wild. They are beautifully open-ended, they embrace uncertainty, and honestly, they actually allow for the possibility of failure. Because as it turns out, learning by failing generates incredibly practical, hyper-localized knowledge about what a community actually needs. Let's make this concrete in Section 4, Case Study, Hanover-Salkamp, looking specifically at the CoopLab project. Let's ground all this abstract theory in some reality using a 2018 project called CoopLab. This took place in the super diverse neighborhood of Hanover-Salkamp over in Germany. Take a look at this comparison here to really grasp the context. On the left, you're seeing the original 1960s design of the neighborhood. It was heavily focused on social housing, packed with these towering 12-story buildings, super auto-centric roads, and these large, monotone, kind of diffuse green spaces right between the high-rises. It definitely wasn't designed for spontaneous human connection, let's put it that way. But on the right, you see the modern goal, using cooperative open space development to actually unite residents and build up that social cohesion. So how did the CoopLab project try to bridge that gap? Well, importantly, not by drafting a shiny new master plan. Instead, they ran real-world experiments. They introduced these really quirky temporary interventions. For example, they just parked a mobile construction trailer right in the neighborhood to serve as an impromptu meeting point. They hosted balcony concerts in local gardens to naturally draw out listeners from all over the place. They even set up these long tables out in the public park so residents could just sit down and chat naturally with city planners and neighborhood managers. No formal invites needed. I think this brilliantly illustrates the messy, truly human-centric nature of a community experiment. As one local social worker put it, in the first few years, we tried a lot of things. I just tried things out and thought, how do you get the people? And honestly, that right there is the pure essence of a real-world experiment. You don't walk in assuming you have all the answers. You just try things out to see what naturally draws people out of their homes and starts breaking down those invisible social borders. By letting the community take the lead in these temporary spaces, the project achieved what academics like to call transdisciplinary knowledge production, which is just a fancy way of saying they unearthed some seriously hidden local knowledge. They discovered that the neighborhood kids desperately wanted a skate park, an ice cream parlor, and a pool. They also learned that different migrant communities had deeply varied and sometimes even conflicting perceptions of safety and community in the area. Guys, this is incredibly rich, vital data that your standard formal town hall meeting is almost never going to capture. Moving right along to Section 5, comparing the two approaches, traditional versus experimental. So how exactly does this scrappy experimental approach stack up against traditional bureaucratic planning? Let's break down the table here. When we look at goals, traditional planning wants permanent, definitive solutions. Real-world labs, they thrive on temporary, transformative interventions. In terms of knowledge, your traditional planners are relying on practical but pretty limited reflection just to get the job done. The lab approach, on the other hand, is totally open-ended and transdisciplinary. It blends academic research directly with everyday citizen experience. And finally, governance. While formal planning is all about negotiating between established stakeholders, real-world labs create truly collaborative, informal networks that bring entirely new voices to the table. But, as amazing as all this sounds, it's definitely not without friction. As one local planner in Hanover pointed out, these creative, collaborative concepts, sure, they exist out in the world, but actually integrating them into the formal practice of a city planning administration, that is still a highly unusual and frankly disruptive shift. Let's be real, city bureaucracies just aren't built for temporary, uncertain experiments. And that brings us to our final section, Section 6, the future of our cities, and integrating experiments into master plans. So how does this actually shape the future of our urban environments? Well, the main takeaway here is that real-world experiments are not meant to completely replace urban planning. I mean, we still absolutely need people to figure out the plumbing and the zoning. Rather, they supercharge it. They act as an incredibly agile pre-planning phase. By doing something as simple as throwing a balcony concert or setting up a long table in a park, you build deep trust with marginalized groups. You provide flexible participation formats for folks who would literally never set foot in a city council meeting. And you access all that hidden community knowledge well before the concrete is ever poured. We started out today by looking at the hard, physical borders of the past. And we've seen how today, overcoming the mental borders in our own neighborhoods requires flexibility, empathy, and a real willingness to embrace the unknown. Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought. I want you to look at your own neighborhood not as a finished product, but as an ongoing process. If your city is a laboratory, what experiment are you running today? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep looking closely at the world around you.